think that the mayor of New York City would learn from COVID-19? So very recently, New York City Mayor Eric Adams made a very, very interesting decision, which I think is very debilitating and can cause a very negative precedence in our schools, especially when we know what this effect will be. But first, let's understand what happened. And this kind of goes back from 2022, because ever since about April of 2022, New York City has brought in about 170,000 asylum seekers who are needing a place to stay. And out of those 170,000, about 70,000 of those individuals are receiving continual care from the New York City government. So most of them are in climate-controlled tents. What happened was, because of the fact that there may have been a strong storm that was coming their way, they decided that, you know what, we need to move them from this center, from these tents, from this area, and we need to place them from here and put them somewhere else. That's not the problem. The problem was where they decided to put them. They decided to put them into James Madison High School, which is in Brooklyn, New York. And so basically they moved 2,000 people into the James Madison High School, removing 3,700 students from their educational learning process. Their education was disrupted, and ultimately a lot of students and a lot of parents, a lot of people from the community were also, as you can kind of tell from myself, upset. Because basically what they decided to say, without lack of better terms, we are putting more precedence into this situation than into our students. And the commissioner of the New York City Emergency Management Team, Zachary Iskol, he downplayed the situation by basically saying that, well, this is an inconvenience for the families, but the kids are gonna be fine. They're going to be fine. You learn nothing from COVID-19, because if you can do this one time, you can do it a second time. And if you do it a second time, you might do it 5 times. And if you do it 5 times, maybe it'll happen 20 more times. See, I know some of you are thinking to yourself, well, this is a one-day event. What is the problem? The problem is, if you allow something to become common practice, this is where we will start seeing even more debilitating issues within our youth education and within our youth development and their overall growth in society. Yeah, we can say this is one time, but one time too many maybe? Because we saw the effects of what putting kids into remote learning situation caused in 2020, 2021, 2022, not more so 2022, but more so 2020 and 2021. We saw what happened. And some of you don't really even understand all the ramifications, because all around the world, globally, they said that learning has depreciated tremendously. They said that ultimately they saw some of the greatest decreases in learning, dropping points by 18 for reading, dropping points by 10 for math, globally. In fact, they even made fun of the United States, because they said that the United States now grew because everyone else was also depreciating in their educational system. So they actually looked better for a moment because of the global impact that COVID had on the education of our youth. They said that students around the world hit historic setbacks, and we want to play the same type of game for our New York City students. Did we not learn from COVID-19? Did we not learn that 25% of students now are receiving higher anxiety every single day as they're walking through the buildings? Did we not learn from the fact that 64% of 8th graders right now are not even reading at a grade-based level? Did we not learn that losing peer connection and losing connection around us can cause issues with depression and stress overload, and ultimately also causing issues within their communities? Did we not learn the health and the emotional and the psychological effects and stressors that caused problems within our youth during those times? Did we not learn the fact that emotional and behavioral issues increased by 43% during and after COVID-19? Did we not learn? Mayor Eric Adams, did you not learn? Because there was a study that was done in Virginia schools that showed that mental health concerns and illnesses grew from 15 to 27% in just that period of time. And this is not just in one area, right? We're talking about, we've seen this all across the world. I grew up in New York, but also now in Canada, we're seeing the increases in mental health happening all over the space. And the global burden of disease study showed that the pandemic had a major negative effect, the most, not on adults, not on women, not on men, not on elderly, but specifically the most on the mental health of youth. And youth are at the highest risk for self-harm and also suicidal ideation. And you're saying to yourself again, man, well, Bryan, this is one time. This is just a one-time occurrence that this happened. Well, this one time, and I'm not saying that this is okay in any way, shape, or form, but this one time even caused people to go as far as to even have a bomb threat. I think that's completely deranged for someone to even try to do a bomb threat just because of this issue as well. We're going way too far with this. But we're showing the ramifications of how far people will go, seeing how this has negatively affected people around them in their communities, and knowing what it can do also to their youth and their educational teachers, administrators, and everyone around them. If you do this one time, how do I not know you can do this again? Some of you are going to say, well, listen, what about the immigrants? Of course. I'm not out here saying that the asylum seekers, immigrants who are coming from another country are to be let go, to be discarded, not cared for in any way, shape, or form. But because, again, there's also children and youth that are a part of this too. And this channel is all about helping youth develop as best as possible. So, of course, I'm not saying not to take care of them in any way, shape, or form. But I'm also not saying for us to put them into a place where our youth need to be, especially when we think about where youth sometimes they go to certain places. They don't necessarily find themselves in the right predicaments because they're not in school. A lot of youth crime happens when a lot of them are not in the schools as well, when they're not in that structure, when they don't have the right people to helping them through their lives. And so why remove youth from their place of harbor of safety and growth and development? What I'm saying is, why didn't you remove them from this climate tent and put them into a museum, put them into another building, put them somewhere that they can be housed, somewhere that they can be taken care of? There's too many buildings in New York City for us to take away from the education of 3,700 students. Or do you value the museums and what's inside of them more than you value the youth of your society? You value material possessions more than the minds of our youth. Is that it? I don't know. At this point, I'm kind of making assumptions, I'm not gonna lie. But why not put them somewhere that does not have to disrupt the future of our people? Disrupting homes, disrupting education, disrupting livelihoods, disrupting learning and development. Because we've seen the ramifications of remote learning, and in fact, they say that most of the issues that happen of the lack of education and growth in students in the past 2 to 3 years was because of the quality of remote learning within educators. And I'm not coming at educators in any way, shape, or form, but a lot of them were not trained to teach over Zoom or online. That wasn't a part of the plan. Generally speaking, we have seen that the shutdowns did not do well for the mental health, development, empowerment of our youth. Generally speaking, we have seen that the youth were negatively affected by this pandemic, by remote learning in general. When you disrupt the normal routine of kids, it disrupts their lives and how they function well. Their brains are not the same as an adult. I don't care how you choose to put it out there, they are not at the same cognitive, behavioral level to be able to deal with certain situations as best as we should be able to as adults. But I really want you to think about this. What about the kids that needed the free food programs at their school because they're dealing with poverty and they don't have all the food that they need at home? What about the kids with special needs and the special education? Kids who have autism, who need those types of supports daily. Kids who are in speech therapy, who need those supports daily to help them to get to where they need to be. What about the fact that kids, when they're around at home a little bit more, sometimes they actually realize how bad it is within their parents, and they see a lot more domestic violence and abuse, which ultimately becomes a cycle in their lives as well, and they end up putting that more into their lives too. That's a whole other subject that we got to deal with and talk about as well. But ultimately speaking, we did not see the great positives of remote learning, and yet we have a commissioner who's willing to downplay the situation, and also the mayor himself, Eric Adams, who chose to make this decision and wants to sit by and ultimately defend his decision as best as possible. I understand the mayor says that, for instance, schools are typically the place for emergency situations. Absolutely, I get that. But are you telling me that in all this time for you to look for another place, the only viable solution was to take away James Madison High School? That was the only viable solution you found? I think that's a farce. Again, shutting down for one day, it's not gonna cause major issue of mental health. No, it won't. But what you have done is set a precedence that many others can choose to follow. And I think that this precedence is very dangerous to the value, the worth, the growth of our youth. And it's time that we prioritize our kids. It's time that we prioritize the mental health of youth around the globe. It's time that we prioritize the fact that these kids need support, stronger supports, and not to downplay the issue to make it seem as though this is not that big of a deal. Is this going to be a new precedence? Is this going to be a new practice? Or are we finally going to stand up and speak up? Because I've got enough.